Hello, everybody. This is Greg from the IoT Consortium, and we're going to get started with today's webinar series in about 2 minutes. We'll let everybody fill in, and then we'll get going. Okay, we're going to get started. So again, my name is Greg Kahn from the IoT Consortium. Welcome to our second live virtual conference series on the topic of the connected home. Really appreciate you all joining us today, particularly those of you that were in areas that were affected by that hurricane. Glad to see it move on from Florida. But we've got a really exciting fall ahead, including today's session. For those of you that were not part of our call last week, we will be launching our first conference this fall in New York City called IoTC Next on November 12th. So please join us for that. But today, we've gathered a brilliant group of industry experts to talk about really important topics that we see in the smart home as a way of educating you, industry leaders, consumers, and IoT enthusiasts on security and health elements of smart home technology. This four-part series started last week and will continue for 2 more sessions after this week. So please continue to check in, and your colleagues can view our webinars afterward on our website. Participants are able to ask questions and interact with our presenters in real time. So if you'll take a look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button that we ask you to kindly type in your questions, and after the presentation by Andrew, we will start addressing some of those questions in real time. So without further ado, today's session has a focus on seniors, which is a really important segment of society that doesn't often get the same attention that it should, and is important for a number of different reasons. One is that the population is aging up in the US, and these are individuals that have a lot of disposable income and time. Today's session is going to be around health, wellness, and independent living trends of smart home, and it will be facilitated by one of IoTC's esteemed member companies, ADT. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Andrew Droney, who is the Senior Director of Health and Innovation Programs at ADT. Andrew is responsible for account and revenue growth of ADT's portfolio of personal emergency response products. He's also responsible for operational efficiencies related to the ADT Health product line. Andrew's presentation will be about increased life expectancies and quality of life through smart technologies that enable greater independence, safety, and security in multifamily and single homes. So without further ado, Andrew, if you're ready, we'll let you take it from here.
All right, Greg, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the webinar today. I'm really glad to be here to discuss a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and likely a topic that's near and dear to many of you: smart home trends and the direction they're moving with the focus on senior health, wellness, and independent living. With the growth of smart home sensor technologies, we're seeing an impact already with how they're changing the lives of seniors, their level of health, independence, wellness, and overall quality of life, and we expect that to continue to grow. I'm very excited to be in this space at this time. We'll go through some of the trends today, but I feel like smart home technologies is really going to enable our senior generations, our older loved ones, to grow old in a place that they like to call home, to keep them independent for a longer period of time and provide a much higher quality of life during those golden years, if you will. So I'm sure many folks on the call here have experienced or will likely experience, or at least know someone who's wrestled with the stressful and uncomfortable questions related to what to do in terms of caring for a loved one. You know, whether or not to move that loved one into a senior living facility, that might be an independent living facility, it might be an assisted living facility, or a full-time care facility. You know, it can cause a great deal of stress on relationships, on finances, the quality of life, not only for the senior, but as we'll talk throughout the webinar today, for the caregiver as well. While everyone may have a sense of the facility that they would like to move a loved one into when they get to that point, the type of facility it may be, oftentimes they experience, quite a bit of sticker shock and may have to opt for a facility that's less opulent or have less amenities or activities for their residents, et cetera. And this can be a real challenge for the loved ones and for the senior as well. I think about a time, this is kind of a funny story. When my mother, who's now 76, when she turned 70, we had a big party for her, and she lives at home with my dad. They're very independent, active golfers, etc. And when she turned 70, I made a joke and signed her up for the newsletter from a local high-end senior living facility, and she's inundated now with mail from that, so she thanks me for that all the time. But the interesting thing about that is she was like, yeah, this place looks great. But then when you get a little bit deeper into it, you look at the price, it's quite exorbitant, and she's like, I'm not interested in doing that. So when you think about that, and you think about, like, what can we do on the connected home side through the use of technology to make our seniors safe, secure, and keep them independent longer, we can have a real impact. People want to live at a place that they consider is their home. Moving folks into an assisted or independent living facility is never done with light heart, or is never easy. And during this session, I'd like to just touch on some of the general ideas around, like, how can technology help keep people more independent, improve their quality of life, and keep them in a place that they call home, and keep them safe and secure. So I want to touch base on some of the statistics regarding the population, the two types of very different customers that you need to consider when you're addressing this space. You've got the loved one, or the person being cared for, the senior, if you will, a mom or an aunt, et cetera. And then you've got the caregiver. And the way that you approach those two distinct those two distinct populations is very important, because they have different concerns and different needs and different expectations around the products and services that can be delivered through smart home solutions and other smart home tech. And then I'll talk a little bit about that, talk about where we see opportunities for smart home tech, along with the considerations for how you design them and deploy them. And then I'll wrap up with some thoughts on artificial intelligence and just interface design, things like that. But I think the key ingredient in the successful deployment of smart home tech in this space is to truly focus on the end user experience. And by those end users, we'll talk, like I said, about those two separate populations. But the user experience is very important, and the extent that you can make it easy for a senior to use, not overwhelming for a caregiver to be experiencing and get overwhelmed with data, and the extent you can reduce false alarms and things like that. It's all very important to the success of that deployment of technology. There's a whole host of different solutions out there. There's a whole host of different conditions out there that need to be cared for. There's a whole host of outcomes and expectations for the caregiver as well as the person being cared for. So again, thanks for joining today. We'll get into it, and I appreciate your questions at the end, but let's just move right ahead and talk a little bit about the statistics, if you will. We talk about the gold rush here at ADT. You may have heard it as the silver tsunami or many other different clever names you can come up with referring to the aging population. But this population is growing by leaps and bounds. It's a fact that can't be ignored. And here you see some kind of key facts that are worthy of consideration. You've probably seen plenty of charts like this showing how quickly the senior population is growing, how they're outpacing the growth of the younger generations, their caregivers, if you will, and how much money they have to spend. This is all good news for those who wish to be involved in helping out the senior population and providing products and services that can generate revenue for your business. So it's a great opportunity, and it's an area at ADT that we're really focused on. We think there's a ton of opportunity through the services we currently provide, and we're looking at a lot of different, future opportunities in how we allow caregivers to take care of their loved ones, and those loved ones and those seniors to remain independent, healthy, safe, and sound. So you look at bullet point number 1. At some point near the end of 2019. There'll be more people worldwide over the age of 65 than under the age of 65. And here we are. It's nearly the end of 2019. This will happen this year. There's more people entering the age group of I need some level of care than there are to provide that care. And when you consider the growth of dual income households, households where there's 3 generations living under one roof, so a caregiver may be caring for young children and caring for elderly parents. The ability of using technology and smart home tech to create efficiencies in getting that care done and getting all that stuff done is really important, because the term, we hear it a lot at ADT, on the ADT Health side, caregiver burnout is a real thing. Caregivers get burned out trying to do everything for all the different groups that they're trying to care for. They're stuck in this kind of sandwiched in the middle between kids and elderly seniors. And it's really important that we deploy technology and make use of the technology available to provide some level of efficiency at providing that care, so that you can reduce the occurrence of caregiver burnout. And finally, somebody kind of throwing up their hands and saying, I can't do this anymore. I've got to move mom into a facility. So you see bullet point number 2, there's currently more than 40 million caregivers in the US who are providing unpaid care to an adult. Again, that goes to the point of there's a lot of people out there providing some level of care, and the extent that we can make that easier on them through the use of technology is going to provide plenty of opportunities for different products and services to be deployed to that group as well. And then bullet point number 3, there's currently more than 40 million caregivers in the US who are providing there's currently more than 40 million caregivers in the US who are providing unpaid care to an adult over the age of 65. And you think about following the money. This is a population that has money and will spend it. One of the keys to think about is how do you gain adoption for technologies with those customers earlier in their life cycle. As you think about a senior, they'll go through, different stages of that kind of senior life cycle of, I'm in good health, I'm in good shape, I'm active, all the way through to staying in care, and then I'm managing some chronic disease later in life. And how do you deploy different solutions that can tackle all those different needs? Well, one of the keys is to extend the time that you're with a customer, particularly if you have a recurring revenue model. How do you get those folks in at a younger age and provide them a product that they love, safety and security at a younger age, and allow that to continue up, and you add or augment or change the type of care, and you become that trusted provider. So when you think about that, I'll just give a story. I'll use personal examples here during the webinar. My father, I use my mom first. My father, he's 76. Again, I said he's an active golfer. When you talk about the traditional PERS device, like ADT Health provides, I've asked him if he'd be interested in that, and he's not interested in wearing a pendant. And you'll see this as you interact with these populations. They're a proud population. He's like, I don't need that. I'm healthy, and I'm not going to wear something that makes me feel old. So we'll talk a little bit later about interfaces and how those work, and what the pros and cons are around different types of interfaces. But really, my dad's in that position where I'd love to be able to get him into a product or service that doesn't make him feel old, but provides me a level of confidence that he's safe and secure when he's out golfing by himself, et cetera. If he should need help, he can get it. So trying to work through some of those issues and understand what those folks need at different stages of their senior life is really important, because not one solution is not going to fit everyone. So you kind of need to walk that fine line between ease of use, usefulness, and coolness, if you will, so that they don't think that their solutions is something that's dedicated to old people, if you will. So the next couple of slides, I just want to go through kind of those two use cases, or those two customer cohorts, if you will. You've got Carol, the caregiver. We like to think about this is the person who's taking care of a loved one, maybe married and have kids in their 20s or younger. Got a nice income, but she's worried about a parent who's alone. And then you have Ethel, the end user, an older female who's widowed, who doesn't want to be a burden on her child, wants to remain independent, but she may not be driving anymore and may need assistance with some day-to-day chores. And how do you balance those two? Quite often, as you go to market with different products and services, we frequently ask ourselves, who are we marketing this to? Is it the end user? Is it the caregiver? Who's going to be paying for it? Is it the end user? Is it the caregiver? And the way that you go to market and the way that you sell different products is really important to kind of figure that out in terms of who is this going to be most useful for? Can we provide a product or service that fits the needs of both of these distinct customer bases? There's not a whole lot of overlap in terms of what they want, and you have to make sure that you're very thoughtful and creative in how you deploy those. So just looking at kind of some of those demographics, 40% of the caregivers live less than 20 minutes away from their care recipient. 85% take care of that relative or take care of a relative. So like I said, this population is growing as more and more seniors age in place. As more and more seniors, get up in age, the number of caregivers and the folks that they're caring for continues to grow. Carol's thinking about her own retirement while she's caring for a loved one, and is afraid that mom's not going to be safe, or mom might fall, or dad might fall, and or have already had that kind of experience. And how can we deploy different strategies? So again, the values key is one of the keys. Like what are the things that the caregiver values? They want the products and services to be reliable. They want them to be affordable and easy to set up and use. That's a little bit different than what the senior may want. And you look at those behaviors and those demographics, it's quite different. And this is really where you have to kind of walk that fine line around what you're providing for the caregiver or the loved one who may be responding to different situations or emergencies, as well as what you're providing for the senior who may be using more frequently or wearing the product and or service that you're providing. They're looking for a sense of independence and respect. How simple are these things to use, et cetera. So as we develop these products and services to customers, it's important to understand that what's good for the caregiver is not always good for the senior, and vice versa. Devices that are simple and straightforward may make a senior feel old. Like we've heard about some of the PERS type devices that ADT deploys. We hear that, and that's something we're looking at changing. How can we provide a device that doesn't make them feel old? But not overwhelm them with technology and interfaces that they can't necessarily operate or understand. We need to strike that balance. We've found in our research the senior group, and you may have experienced this yourself, is becoming more and more comfortable with technology. More and more seniors every day are getting smartphones. But when you talk to the seniors, they often say, I'm comfortable with some level of technology, but I don't necessarily think I'm a good I'm a good user of it, if you will. So that's an important thing to think about, and we'll talk a little bit later about like interfaces and what works, what doesn't, and what to consider as we go through and start to develop products and services or combinations of smart home tech and services that can be winners in the marketplace. So last slide kind of around this topic of concerns and caregiver versus end user. Starting on the left, the feeling of this is the caregiver concerns, and going over to the right are the end user concerns, and then the middle are some of those things that impact both. So many caregivers not only have to take care of a senior, but also their own children. We talked about that. The ability to allow them some time and space to do their own thing without feeling like they're abandoning a parent is very powerful. So providing devices and products and services that folks can make use of and give that caregiver some time off, if you will, is really important. And then ease of use is another big one. It's difficult to set up or use a device, it won't be successful. If a caregiver or an end user has difficulty setting up any of these devices or making use of them, or even fitting them into a charger, or how do I charge this thing? How frequently do I need to charge it? Do I remember to wear it, etc., can really impact the success of a deployment of technology. So I'll give you an interesting story here, going back to again, another personal example, going back to the care or the seniors using technology but not necessarily being good at it. So my in-laws, my father-in-law, mother-in-law live on the Jersey Shore. We frequently go up there on the weekends to spend time at the beach and spend time with them. And I have a niece who plays field hockey for the Penn State Lions field hockey team. She had a game on Sunday. The game was televised online, so you had to watch it on your computer. And my father-in-law was scrambling around the house trying to set up his laptop to get it set up and tied to his TV so we could watch his granddaughter play in her first field hockey game for Penn State. So it was this mad scramble. He was asking all the kids to help him figure out how to work the TV, but he didn't want them to just kind of sit in front of it and fix it for him. He wanted to see what was going on. After much screaming and yelling, about halfway through the first quarter, my father-in-law kind of stood up, screamed, "We're done. I got to go in the back and just unplug the modem and see if that resets it." So that's kind of the use case. The funny thing is, right after that evening, our family has a fantasy football draft, and my father-in-law was on his iPad trying to do the fantasy football draft, and it was the same kind of thing, like, comfortable with an iPad and surfing the net, but had really struggling to figure out the fantasy football draft. And it was just, I thought, a really interesting story. It kind of showed that, look, they want to use the technology, but if it's not easy to use and it's not straightforward and simple, they're ready to kind of throw that thing out the window. So my point there is it's really important to understand that, and just thinking that I have a great product or service that I can deploy that seems great to me or easy to use for me because I'm tech savvy is not necessarily going to be the case for a senior. And then a couple of other really interesting and important points to think about when you go through designing a product or a deployment of technology in the smart home space is to think about services and what are the concerns around services if you're on an RMR type product, a product that may require a contract. There's a lot of sensitivity in this space around that. Sometimes seniors are in rental properties, so you think about the multifamily solutions. What does that look like? Am I going to be installing devices in a rental property? How can I make that easy to deploy and potentially move if I'm a mover? And thinking about terms of service and contract, as well as fixed pricing. A lot of seniors are on fixed incomes. They don't take kindly to price increases, and they don't take kindly to contracts because they don't know how long they're going to be using a service. And those are some things to factor in as you're trying to design and develop a product and a solution and take it to market. Interesting point of fact, ADT's Health's longest tenured customer in the PERS space right now is 31 years. We've got a customer that's been on our product for 31 years. It's a PERS product. And that's just a great example of what you're talking about. As you're designing a product, and ADT's policy is it's a no contract product. Our PERS devices are no contract, and we don't increase prices throughout the term of your contract. So this customer is paying what they were paying 31 years ago. They're still a happy user, and somewhere in the middle of that continuum to think about as you design these products and services, keeping prices fixed and a contract that's got some flexibility built into it is very important to the senior population. As you move on, a couple of key areas of focus to think about that we look at on the ADT side. One solution is not going to solve all of these problems, and trying to think through like what are the different things that you want to solve for is really important. You've got on the left side your general safety type of devices, your monitoring and response type devices. This is what ADT Health is in right now, and we're looking to get into some of these others around medical alerts, fall detection. You got home security, device monitoring, location sharing with like ADT Go, our mobile security app. It provides the ability for a loved one to see where a senior might be if they're active out and about. And there's a whole host of different products, whether they're home-based or mobile products, that provide a general level of safety, security, and response to those types of devices. But where you deploy those is basically an event has to happen and then you get a response. And that's what ADT does so well. We've got amazing agents that handle these calls. They're specially trained and they provide incredible levels of service. But then you start to look at some of the other items or other areas of focus when you get into kind of senior safety and deploying smart home technologies. One of the ones that's seen a lot of kind of growth is tracking activities of daily living, or ADL, and the use of smart home sensors and different devices in the house. The ability to take a motion detector or a door sensor or any other host of different smart home tech in the house and make some determinations about what's going on, combined with some artificial intelligence that we'll talk about, can be really powerful. But it can also be really overwhelming. So again, getting back to being smart about the way you design your products and services is really important. When you think about activities of daily living, I could potentially put a sensor deployment in an apartment and get a sense for how frequently, what's the sleep quality of my mom or dad? How often are they waking up? How often are they getting out of bed in the middle of the night? When are they going to bed? When are they waking up? Things like that, as well as how many trips to the bathroom are they making? If there's a sudden spike in trips to the bathroom, it might indicate that there's a health issue at play. The key to these is building the smarts into. I certainly don't think that if I was going to deploy a product that was going to track activities of daily living, that I would need to get a notification on my phone as a caregiver that every time my mom or dad went to the bathroom. So, being wise and being smart about what do you do with all the information you're gathering is really crucial. To say, okay, in this scenario, maybe it warrants a notification either to a monitoring center or to a loved one that something's happened. In another scenario, I don't necessarily need to get mom went to the bathroom again, right? So being really smart about how you deploy those things and understanding a senior doesn't want to be called all the time to say, hey, you got up late today. And it may just be like, hey, I wanted to sleep late. That's why I got up late. And that reduces kind of that level of independence. So again, going back to that two-sided customer, caregiver versus senior, it's really important to understand, where that fine line is around providing safety, security, and independence without being overwhelming and not overbearing a caregiver and burning them out. Social isolation is another really interesting one. A lot of studies have been done around the impact of social isolation and loneliness on just general health and longevity. So there's a number of products out there that are trying to tackle this piece. How can you interact on a social level with folks inside the home, folks that are aging, whether it be through technology or through other types of service? How can you keep somebody engaged and feeling social and not lonely, because that will have a dramatic impact on their overall quality of life and their desire to stay home in an independent facility, and their desire to not move into an assisted living facility per se. And then you get into disease management, which is also a big one, growing because there's a lot of money around reimbursement, insurance costs, et cetera. Disease management is this final area I'll kind of touch on in these areas of focus. As insurance companies look to trim costs, government rules related to reimbursements through Medicare and Medicaid move more towards outcome-based structures where instead of fee-for-service, you're getting paid. If you have a readmittance, it can impact your ability to get reimbursed. Doctors want to keep those patients when they discharge them home and safe and secure. And there's a number of ways to accomplish that. But again, the ability for a senior to interact with those technologies and do so on a regular basis can be a challenge. So getting a customer to deploy devices in the home use them on a regular basis. A patient with a chronic disease may need to monitor 4 or 5 different statistics, whether it's pulse oximeter devices, and weight, blood pressure, etc. But it's probably only realistic to expect them to regularly do 1 or 2, the easiest 1 or 2. So are there devices out there that can combine different measurements or through the use of one interface allow a patient to develop or to submit data that a doctor could potentially review and understand, like, hey, you've got a situation going on. I want to change something with your medication before you get to the point where you fall or you need an emergency room readmission. That's really important. And then you start to talk about things like medicine compliance. There's plenty of pill dispensers out there, but just because a pill is dispensed doesn't always mean it's taken. So you get back into the how intrusive do you want to be with that? There's some pill dispensers out there that have a camera on it, so you can watch the patient actually take the pill. But again, how intrusive do you want to be on that loved one in terms of, hey, I'm watching you, please take your pill now. There's a lot of different factors around that should be considered. One of the things that I'm really interested in, and we've seen a lot of, there's a ton of different interfaces out there. And I think this is really kind of the crux of how do you make a successful deployment of technology. It really comes down to user experience. And again, back to those 2 users, caregiver and senior, what is the best way to deploy them? And I don't know if there's just one, perfect way to interface with different devices. As seniors age, their physical abilities and qualities of different parts of their body change. So you think about a pendant or a wristband, those are easy to push, but sometimes people with arthritis can't push them. You get into smartwatches, which is a really hot item. Like if I could deploy a smartwatch that a senior can make use of, that's also a PERS device, that's exciting, but it's got to be a smartwatch that a senior can use. An interface, when I look at my watch, I can read it because there's limited real estate. And then also a watch that's not enormous for my grandmother to wear, but she can also interact with. Interesting story here, looking at a couple of different companies around pendants and smartwatch type devices. And I was talking to a company that had a bunch of different trackable kinds of devices, and they were running through their different solutions, and they showed a kid watch, a kid tracker, a watch that had some games on it. It was pink or blue, like light blue, so your son or daughter could wear it to school. You could track location. You could make a couple of phone calls with it to different preset numbers. You could receive, it had a little camera on it. And as the company we're talking to kind of blew through it and was like, yeah, this is for kids. We said, wait, let's take a look at that. That you change the color of that and change the game on it from a kid game to some sort of memory game. That might be an interesting solution that a senior will be able to use. It's not a huge watch, but it's very simple and straightforward. So again, the interface here is key. While folks want smart watches, etc., understanding like the ability of the senior to interact with those devices can be challenging. I recently learned that as you get older, your skin changes, and using a touchscreen tablet can be difficult for some folks. So those are things to consider. And you start looking at the different wearables that are out there. Some of the interesting ones. Hearables are your hearing aids devices. You can get a lot of biometric data out of a hearing aid. There's a lot of smart hearing aids that are out there now that are collecting some of that information, trying to do different things with it. But I think really where the success can lie is those devices that can be that are frequently worn, that are worn without thinking. It's not an extra device I have to put on. It's not something. So we've seen belts or shoes or rings are an interesting one as well, and different pieces of jewelry that I don't have to remember when I'm walking out the door to grab my my PERS device or grab my senior health device. It's just included, in something that I'm wearing. So there's a lot of movement in the space around that, and some interesting things in that space. One of the other interesting things on the non-wearable side, voice assist. I think the voice assistant space is a really interesting one that can tackle a number of different needs for the senior and for the caregiver. The ability to drop in on a senior and not necessarily have a camera that's watching them all the time inside their apartment, is very interesting. And once you get a senior over the hump of being concerned about, is this thing always listening to me, and you can show some interesting interactions with a voice assistant, seniors typically are gravitating towards those types of devices and interacting with them on a regular basis, whether it's to play Jeopardy or whether it's to have a conversation with, asking about the weather, asking about sports scores, etc. But then you can also utilize those voice assistants as an interface that's not impacted by the dryness of your skin or the ability for you to see or degradation. And now certainly hearing, you can crank up the volume hopefully and hear those devices. But the voice assistants are certainly an interesting area where we see a lot of promise in the senior space. Then passive monitoring, we talked a little bit about in the activities of daily living. What can we learn about different devices that can potentially detect falls without a fall detection pendant being worn on the chest are certainly interesting, and provide a great way for a senior to remain independent, safe, and healthy inside a house or apartment. And then when you start to get into medical management, like I talked about earlier, asking a senior to take 15 minutes out of the day to apply correctly and take measurements of a number of different health related biometric items is a bit of a challenge. So being smart about how those are deployed, and are there devices that can gather multiple data sets from one interaction or one deployment on a finger or on a scale or things like that, are really interesting and are happening as we see moving down the road. So artificial intelligence, I touched on a good bit of this. I think that I lost my slide, I think. Artificial intelligence is, hold on one sec.
You're good, Andrew. We can
I'm
see
good.
you.
You guys can see it?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, on my side, I lost my sound. Okay, I'm back. So growing device advances in these wearable devices and interactive platforms combined with artificial intelligence are really going to hit that sweet spot between senior and caregiver. So I think the more that we can deploy different types of artificial intelligence to understand what's going on with the senior and not overwhelm the caregiver with data is really important. And there's so many different, as you age, there's so many different aspects that need to be thought about and cared for. There's not just one solution. You talk about sleep patterns, bathroom usage, eating habits, activity levels, vital signs, gait analysis. I mean, there's a whole host of indicators that something may be imminent in terms of a fall or a health issue. And it's impossible for a caregiver to just take that data raw and try to determine what the heck's going on. Like, mom went to the bathroom 4 times last week, she's going 6 times this week. Is that something that's unusual? What do I do with that data? The ability to take artificial intelligence and really kind of start to crunch that and understand, hey, this is a problem that, you know, I may need to get a loved one involved in. This is a problem I may need to contact a monitoring center and ADT to get involved in. This is a problem that I may need to contact a doctor and say, hey, there's something going on here, you may need to be involved. The ability to take all that data, synthesize it, and gather meaningful insights is going to be the key to the success in terms of what you're able to do, how you're able to keep people at home safe and comfortable, and how you're able to mitigate the impact of that caregiver burnout, if you will. So that's pretty much kind of the way we see things here at ADT. I'd encourage you, we'll get into some Q&A. I'd encourage you to check out our website, adt.com/health, to see the different solutions that we currently have in play. And I appreciate everyone's time, and I'm happy to take some questions around the topic today. I'm happy to talk about it. It's, like I said, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrew. Terrific presentation, and I'll kick off the Q&A here. Just a reminder to everybody, if you do have a question for Andrew, there's a Q&A button on the bottom. Please go ahead and type your question in now. We'll do our best to answer it, and otherwise, if we run out of time, we'll send it to Andrew after the fact so that he can respond. You know, the first question, Andrew, relates to privacy and security, and I think there's this interesting paradigm around collecting enough information from seniors to be proactive, and also you know, sort of maintaining their personally identifiable information, or maintaining that right balance of not being overly intrusive. How do we as an industry, and how does ADT think about that kind of that balance between enough monitoring for it to be useful for both the caregiver and the end user, but also maintain that kind of proprietary information?
Well, certainly security is top of mind in terms of any of this information. When you look at the transmission of medical grade or medical information, when we talk about remote patient monitoring, et cetera, certainly working with a platform, if you will, that's certified as HIPAA compliant is table stakes, obviously, to get into that space. But I think just as ADT looks really hard as we design any products around security or health safety, we look at the security aspects of it and try to design that into how do we secure this data, how do we encrypt the data as we're transmitting it, how do we make it something that cannot be hacked, and I think those are keys that need to be incorporated in the design of a product and service. So simply just kind of mashing together off the shelf, voice assistants per se is probably not the way to go. making sure that you can maybe build some of that functionality into those, but the transmission of that data, if you're transmitting it to a call center or to a doctor's office, et cetera, that's all got to be secured, just like any information like around cameras and things like that. When in the security side of the smart home space, that's a key. Certainly, a breach of that, impacts your customer's ability to trust you and to participate in purchasing and utilizing your products over time.
So just a follow-up to that. This is a question from Eric Smith, which is building on that secure by design framework, but looking at threats within the individual sensors. And so the question from Eric is, how is ADT approaching inclusion within a growing threat of compromise at the sensor level?
So I know as we go through the process of identifying either different sensors or developing sensors that we're using, we build that in from the beginning, in terms of ensuring that we're securing those sensor devices, and we're deploying devices that are secure, encrypted, etc. I know Ray North's giving a talk around our device security coming up here as one of the webinars. He probably can speak a little bit more in depth on the tech side of that, but I hope that answered the question. I don't know if I did the best job of answering that, but I know that we, as ADT goes about in designing their products, security is obviously, we're a security company. We just celebrated our 145th birthday a couple weeks ago, and that's what we're known for, and we don't take any risks in terms of deploying devices we don't feel are secure and safe from all those threats. So, and it's done at the sensor level in terms of beginning of design and analysis of an evaluation of different products to make sure that they're not susceptible to breach as best we can. So.
Thank you. Next question. So this is a question from Don Ham. Do you have any solutions related to air and water quality, which research statistics show are the top two aspects of a healthy home?
That's interesting. We currently do not. However, I was just out at a conference in San Diego last week, and there were I know that there was a company that was promoting a healthy air quality type device. We had some conversations. It's certainly something that's interesting in terms of, there's a whole host of different products and add-ons that you can look for in terms of, like, how do I deploy this, and what's the cost of it, and what's the service look like in terms of deployment in different solutions. So it's certainly something that's interesting for sure. I've recently, like I said, hadn't really considered a whole lot of that in terms of the deployments we currently make, but obviously keeping the home and the air quality safe and healthy is important, and we would certainly investigate if that's something that there's a market for out there and potentially be deployed as one of our solutions. So.
Okay, next question is from PJ Han, and PJ would like to ask if these artificial intelligence technologies would be available for low-income families, and if they're not, what can industry leaders like yourself do to make this tech available for low-income families?
So I will tell you, we do a lot of business with government funded entities that provide senior safety and security devices, and we deploy plenty of PERS devices out to through different waiver programs and different Medicare, Medicaid programs to low income families. So I think the challenge there is getting buy-in from those different entities who are willing to, disperse limited budgets to those different technologies, if you will. So PERS is one that they do reimburse, and I know that they're frequently looking at others. So if there's a smart deployment of artificial intelligence that can be made that would accomplish, keeping seniors safe and healthy at a price point that's attractive to those governments with limited budgets. I'm sure with the right pitch, they would certainly consider it. So as the technology advances, I would expect that more and more government entities on the low income side would be interested in what can we do for our constituencies, if you will. PERS for a long time was home-based PERS. Now the government's getting more into they'll reimburse for mobile PERS. So that's a technology advancement that's happened recently, or relatively recently, and those entities are now saying, okay, we'll take this. This is something that we're interested in for seniors who are a little bit more active or go out and about rather than being homebound. We would reimburse for those. So there are opportunities out there. It's got to be the right solution, and convincing on that low income side, convincing those programs to reimburse, I think is where you might start to see some of that.
Sounds good. The next question is from Mark Jenner. And this question is, are you incorporating the concept of access to the home as part of your overall strategy? For example, in case of a medical emergency, how can the locks on your doors, primarily thought of as a security device to keep people out, be used to provide seamless access into the home to provide care when needed?
Absolutely. So certainly the use of smart locks and the ability to unlock those can really save a lot of hassle and difficulty for someone who may have had an issue. Bottom line, if you send the first responders, they're going to get into your house. Unfortunately, if you don't have a smart lock or a lockbox, ADT, we sell, and sometimes on special we'll provide lock boxes for our PERS customers where you can keep a key, in a lockbox. And even if a customer has a smart lock, and wants to give us that information, we'll have it when we respond, and we can tell the first responders, hey, the code's 1234. This is how you can get into the house if you need to, so that they're not, breaking down the door. So absolutely, I think as you see more and more smart home deployments, you see more and more opportunities to take a security device such as a lock, or a security device that's typically a security device, a motion detector, and redeploy it as a sensor that can transmit some data or give us some insights as to what's going on in the house, and not simply be used as a motion detection security type device. So I think that's one of the interesting things with the mass deployment of smart home technologies, the ability to take those and use them for other purposes other than, say, smart home deployments, or even better yet, when you think about things like lights and motion detectors for a senior who may get up in the middle of the night and use the bathroom 2 or 3 times, you won't want them to trip. Potentially using a motion detector combined with the light switch to turn the lights on like 10%. So they're like night lights. The customer's not blinded when they wake up to go to the bathroom, but they're not going to trip over a cord or trip over something in the way. And then when you go back to sleep, the motion detector doesn't sense motion, and now the lights go back out. So absolutely, I think that's really the key here. How can you take all of these different technologies, whether they're deployed as part of a smart security, a smart home type scenario, or a more of a health-focused scenario? I think you can take those and combine them in interesting ways that can help the senior and help the caregiver as well.
Terrific. Final question, Andrew, from Eric Smith. Is the connected vehicle and the larger smart home connected grid a strategic growth focus for ADT, or is the premise to surround the family unit and constrain it to a residential environment?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily connected vehicle, but where ADT is starting to focus and really starting to grow out of our premises-based safety and security piece, you're starting to see a greater focus on, 10 years ago, you'd say ADT was great. It secures my home. When I step off the front porch, it doesn't go with me, right? So it's securing my home. We're looking at and deploying technologies such as ADT Go. How do we take what ADT offers in terms of monitoring and response? And that can be security, it can be health, safety, et cetera. And how do we take that so you can take that with you and get out of the home, whether it be tied to a vehicle or tied to a person via their smartphone, which can probably go a little bit farther. When you think about when mobile phones kind of came out, you had your car phone, right? Now we've got mobile phones we can take everywhere. The interesting way to go through that is to deploy safety and security and monitoring and response to what ADT does and take it beyond the home, beyond the premise, beyond the business, if you will. So yes, we're looking at all different ways that you're not just having your home secured, which is great, but when you step off the porch, how can we make you safe, healthy, and secure? And our GPS-enabled PERS devices offer that same type of safety and security, where if you're out and about at a mall and you fall down, we'll get a signal and we'll also get your location in terms of where you are, and we can send help exactly where you need it to be.
Andrew, one more question slipped through, so we're going to ask the question from Ken Dix, which is presumably gathering and monitoring data throughout the home, vehicle, and person is critical to the machine learning and AI you spoke about. How does ADT go about aggregating data across different devices and or services, many which are BYO, not part of an ADT kit?
So I think that's a little bit of the holy grail. How do you take devices that maybe aren't part of an ADT kit and incorporate those? ADT in our smart home technologies is doing that with different select providers. Not necessarily every provider of a smart home device can get on the ADT platform, but we do have integrations with a number of different providers that can connect to the ADT platform, and we can interact with those devices. So certainly something that's interesting when you consider, part of the process there is making sure that how that information is going to be kept secure and making sure it's going to work well with the ADT platform, the devices that we have, to make sure that it's a seamless customer experience.
Terrific. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of today. Andrew, this was a terrific presentation and discussion. I want to encourage everybody, if you have additional questions, to send them through to us at marketing@ifthings.org, marketing@ifthings.org, and we will send them over to Andrew. Also, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to continue the conversation with Andrew and the ADT team. ADT will also be presenting in 2 weeks on our webinar series, so come back the next 2 weeks to hear more from them. And again, really thank you for today's enlightening conversation, and enjoy the rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.